Welcome to Motormouth, brought to you by the Boyertown Museum of Historic Vehicles. I'm Kendra.
I'm Dan.
And we're here out by the Gyronaut X1. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, if you'd like to contact us here at the Boyertown Museum, you can reach us 7 days a week, 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we'd love to hear from you. Call us at 610-367-2090. Visit our website at www.boyertownmuseum.org. You can hear about all of our upcoming events, all the new stuff happening here. And speaking of events, today's show, or this month's show, is going to kind of be focused on some big events that we've had or are having right now as we stand here speaking. Behind us is this gorgeous Gyronaut X1 that in 1966 set the land speed record for motorcycles. And we got it the very tail end of February, I guess. And it's only going to be here until mid-April, so I don't even know if it'll still be here when this show airs. Hopefully it is, and you'll get a chance to come see it in person if you haven't yet already. We're just so excited to have this because it's cool. It's a cool example of a streamliner.
It's like 147 miles an hour, 148, or 248, something like that.
Set the record at 245.667.
Oh, excuse me.
Isn't that crazy? No,
it is.
I only get it in if it's stationary, I think. But
okay.
We're very, very fortunate to have this on loan to us from Steve Tremulous. His uncle, Alex Tremulous, is the one that did the design on it. He was very into streamlining. He did work for Tucker, for Ford.
And speaking of Tucker, one of the guys who helped restore the body on this is the great-grandson of Alex Tucker.
Preston Tucker.
Preston Tucker, excuse me, Who's been on the show before also.
Who's been on our show before. You may remember a few years ago, we did a program with Sean Tucker, Rob Ida, and Mike Sabacek, and they talked about, they were building Preston Tucker's car he never got a chance to build. Because he was too ahead of the time, I guess. Well, we're really fortunate now that the other week, Rob and Sean were here at the museum to talk about this vehicle. It was a really neat evening. We had about 50 people here, and they gave us a talk on the streamliner, and they had some great photos, and they were really kind enough to let PCTV and Motormouth film them that night. So what you're going to see here in a minute or two is Rob and Sean's presentation. So it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I think, for our museum, because before this month is over, this is going back out to California to its owner. So I
think it's going to a museum out there.
It's being inducted into a Hall of Fame, so
for Dry Lakes Racing.
Yes, so it'll probably really not leave the West Coast. At least not in the foreseeable future. So we're really lucky to have it. We thank Steve for letting us borrow it. We thank Rob and Sean for helping they brought it down here for us. And we thank them for coming last week to give this really cool presentation that you're gonna be lucky enough to have a front row seat to. So here they are, Rob and Sean. Enjoy, and then we'll have another guest for you at the end of their presentation.
Thank you guys for coming tonight. On behalf of the museum, we just want to thank everyone for coming and spending an evening with the Gyronaut. This is a really neat piece of history, and we're really excited that it's here. So I want to introduce our two speakers for tonight. The first is Rob Ida. He is the owner of Ida Automotive, and he did the body restoration on this Gyronaut. I also want to introduce Sean Tucker, who is the great-grandson of Preston Tucker, which is really neat. And he also assisted in the body restoration of the Gyronaut. So if everyone would just join me in giving them a round of applause as they come up to the podium.
And we're happy to bring the Gyronaut here on display on behalf of Steve Tremulous, who's the owner of the Gyronaut. So he's in California, and so we've had the Gyronaut at our place over the last couple of years where we did the restoration. So we decided to bring it here, so we're kind of representing him. Sean Tucker and myself were involved in the restoration of the Gyronaut. We did the restoration of the body. So we recreated some of the missing panels and restored the panels that were damaged in the crash. But before we get too deep into the restoration, I'm going to run a little video for you that Steve Tremulous made. It gives you a little bit of background on the Gyronaut itself.
That's a very special place here. There's nowhere in the world like it. That's the first time a Gyronaut has been back where it belongs. It's been a long time. This motorcycle has logged more miles and more time above 200 miles an hour than any motorcycle in history.
The Gyronaut looked like a rocket ship. It had two wheels, but that body was streamlined. It had a tail on the back end, which just looked like it was going to go fast.
This was a very unusual motorcycle because of the fact that it had two motors. And two motors was largely thought of as being something that wasn't going to work. But of course I was absolutely sure that it was going to work, and it would give us the reliability with the power we needed. When you're riding a motorcycle at aircraft speeds on the ground, you don't need an engine failure. And when you have one, it's frightening.
For Bob LePen, it took guts. It took incredible courage to strap yourself into the Gyronaut and to run that thing flat out.
When you first get in something like this, if you were in the least bit claustrophobic, you could not function in this bike. Going 300 on a bike is the equivalent of going 700 in a car, you know what I mean? It's just a very difficult exercise. Every run is, you're on the edge. Somebody will die today, but it won't be me attitude has to be part of your makeup. You know, I'm not dying today.
Bob was sitting in this 2-foot diameter tube, strapped in, no room to move, trapped within this capsule, just a couple inches off the ground, being hurled down the salt faster than what the top speed of many airplanes are capable of.
I'm for anybody that wants to do something. I don't care what it is. I think records are nice to have.
Keep the faith, baby.
I couldn't have done it without, we had many, many gifted people with tremendous talent.
This is Alex Tremulous's crowning achievement for streamlining. Alex loved professing streamlining.
Keep the faith, baby.
It took 30 years of trying to convince the automobile industry that streamlining can not only get you a more efficient automobile, but you can go fast using streamlining. In order to learn more about what cars were going fast, the most logical place to do that was where the cars were going fast, and that was Bonneville Salt Flats. Alex met Bob LePen out at the Salt Flats in 1963, and the two of them had exact similar goals. Bob wanted to be the fastest man on two wheels. Alex had something to prove with the aerodynamics, and the two of those meshed so well together that as they began talking after 1963 Speed Week, their concepts gelled into what became the first Gyronaut.
This is a white Everest here. You know, this is a flat Everest. You're going to put yourself in a position where you may die. You're going to be going at speeds that have never been done before. Here, it's all what you do. You're all alone here. This bike, when everything is correct, is one of the most wonderful things you could ever ride. When things aren't going well, it's absolutely terrifying. I've been in high winds with it where I've actually leaned over so far I've scraped the bodywork on the salt. If you keep retreating, you'll never break the record. Sooner or later, you're going to have to keep the throttle on. I remember the run just like it was yesterday because I'm hard on it. I'm determined on the return run that if I'm going to blow it up, I'm going to blow it up. If we're going to crash it, we're going to crash it. You know what I mean? This is it. You know. Is there fear? Of course. And you have to work your way past the fear. If you're not prepared to lay it all on the line, this is not what you should be doing. You can't be a normal person and be doing this. You know. I mean, you got to be a little bit over the edge. Once I got very comfortable and was capable of knowing exactly what the bike was doing, it became very enjoyable. It was wonderful to switch the engines off at 240 miles an hour and snick it into neutral, and the only thing you could hear would be the actual wind over the shell and the sound of the tires, and that's just an incredible experience. The greatest moment at Bonneville is when you see the mile marker coming and you know you're over the speed that you want to achieve. 65, we broke the world gas record. In 66, we broke the absolute record. If I were building another bike, I wouldn't change a thing. I'd do it exactly like we did this one, you know, because how can you improve on perfect? This bike set the standard that all the others have followed. And I'm quite proud of that.
The Gyronaut was the fastest motorcycle in the world. The Gyronaut needs to run again. I'm going to restore the Gyronaut and the history that it created. The chassis, as you can see, is just in remarkable shape. Bob LePen spent the last several years restoring the chassis, but there are some parts that need restoration. We have the tail section for the bike and the nose cone for the bike and the belly pan. We're missing the driver's canopy and we're missing the engine cover. Both of those were made out of fiberglass. Then once those are fabricated and fitted to the body, then everything gets painted. The original colors were beautiful silver and Artesian red. Then we need to get the sponsors' logos on the bike, and hopefully there's some sponsors that will step up to the plate and help out with the restoration, and we'll be able to get those logos involved as well. Once this is complete and we have it in show-ready condition, we intend to bring it to as many automobile shows and motorcycle shows, hopefully judged events, where it can be compared to its peers back in the 60s, and really tell the story of Alex Tremulous and Bob LePen and the Gyronaut, and how they were able to achieve such a high record-setting speed with such a low horsepower engine combination, basically by using streamlining. So there's a tremendous amount of educational value that can be gleaned from the history of the Gyronaut, from the automotive history that stood behind it between Alex Tremulous and his streamlining philosophy, all the way to afterwards with bikes and what land speed records were influenced by the Gyronaut back in the 60s as well. It tells a very good story. We're going to bring the history and accomplishments, the remarkable achievements of the Gyronaut to an entire new generation.
So that was a film that was made by Steve Tremulous, who's the owner of the Gyronaut, but also he's the nephew of Alex Tremulous. And Alex Tremulous was the designer, the stylist. Before this project, Alex Tremulous and Bob LePen didn't know each other, but they were both after the same goal. Bob LePen had the world's fastest drag racing motorcycle, and he used these two engines in that motorcycle. It was called the Cannibal. And when he ran that bike, he was basically untouchable. There was nobody who could really compete with him. And then he felt he kind of gone as far as he can go in drag racing motorcycles. So he decided to go land speed racing. And his first attempt, he bought someone's streamlined motorcycle and he installed his engines in it, and it wasn't very successful. But when he went to Speed Week, when he went to Bonneville, and had his failures, it was a great thing, because that's when he met Alex Tremulous. And Alex Tremulous was after the same goal. He wanted to build the world's fastest motorcycle. And so they had a conversation, and Tremulous said, I think you have enough horsepower. It's not really about the horsepower. It's about the shape of the body. It's about the aerodynamics. That's what will make this the world's fastest motorcycle. So together, those guys started to throw ideas back and forth, and they then reached into resources that Alex Tremulous had and LePan didn't, and together they were able to start to develop a plan to build the world's fastest motorcycle. So here's Alex Tremulous in front of one of his other crowning achievements of his career. And now he's worked for many car companies, but the 1948 Tucker and the Gyronaut are believed to be his two favorite projects. And the Tucker is kind of what was the thing that brought us into the world of the Gyronaut. So my shop isn't known for working on motorcycles, but we do have this connection to Tucker. And so this is Sean Tucker. He's the great-grandson of Preston Tucker, and his great-grandfather and Alex Tremulous designed the Tucker cars. So Sean can talk a little bit about the career of Alex Tremulous. Here's the... Yeah,
oh, yeah. Hello, everyone. So we'll talk a little bit about Alex Tremulous and then some of the developments of his career into Tucker, and then touch on Gyronaut as well. So Alex Tremulous was born in 1914 and took an interest in automobiles, everything automobiles, pretty early on. Grew up in Chicago, and by the time he was 20, was already walking into Duesenberg showrooms and showing them drawings that were impressive enough, like this one, that they said, hey, you can really draw cars. You know, this might be your thing. So he designed this car, I think, when he was 20, and it did get created, and there it is. This is a Duesenberg. So from Chicago, he rotated through a number of other different companies, one of them actually being American Bantam. And there's an interesting kind of extra connection with the Bantam Roadster here. This car was originally designed by a guy named Alexis de Sankovsky, who later designed the Tucker Carioca. Tremulous took this design and turned it into the Bantam Hollywood while he worked there. So it's everywhere you look, you can kind of find a connection that goes back to all these different people. So that's pretty cool. Yep. So this car is another famous streamliner that Alex Tremulous then developed into the lower car called the Thunderbolt. There was 4 of these built, and primarily as concept cars. But you can see the influence of streamlining pretty much in every Tremulous design. And I remember Steve Tremulous was giving a presentation once, and he said, you know, Alex Tremulous would put a fin on a turtle. So he would really, you know, he was really into making things look neat and go fast. So during World War II, he was in the Air Force. He worked for, he primarily did designs on aircraft, and they actually transferred him to like the rocket division. So he was working on spaceships and things like that never actually completely got finished. But that was they recognized his talents for drawing it and streamlining it, and moved him into that role. So here he is drawn away. So after World War II is really when the Tucker connection starts. So Preston Tucker had started working on the Tucker car somewhere in the early to mid 40s, 44, 45. He was working with another designer named George Lawson. When Alex Tremulous came into the picture, he had seen the Tucker being advertised as the Tucker Torpedo, which is technically a different car, but recognized some of the shortcomings of the design being not really suited for production. So he had some ideas relative to aerodynamics and also for manufacturability and really to make it a usable car. So that's the Tucker 48 that we all know today. That's Preston Tucker in the driver's seat. But Tremulous was instrumental in getting the design to a production-ready point. So some of the differences that he recognized were, number one, you need room for people in it. So the torpedo design it was a very attractive car with kind of a bubble roof, but he recognized that a person can't fit in there, so they squared the roof off. There's a lot of aircraft design elements in the way the doors integrate with the body and the fact that there's no external drip rails and things like that. So a lot of those were Tremulous ideas that ended up in the final design. So after Tucker, he worked for a number of different places. He started at Kaiser Frazer in the 50s after the demise of Tucker. Worked there for a little while, then moved to Ford. Eventually, he actually ended up at Subaru, and if anybody's seen the Subaru Brat from like the early 80s, kind of like funny looking, well, I shouldn't say funny looking, but that was actually a Tremulous design. And if you look in the original brochures, there was an option to have a third headlight behind the grille. So from his Tucker days, he kind of kept some of those design elements all the way through. So this is more Tremulous streamlining. So the Gyronaut actually started out, this is the Gyronaut X1, but the original concept that he had for the Gyronaut was actually to be powered by a Ford V8 designed by Shelby out of a Fairlane. He got fired from Ford before they could do that. And the reason it's called Gyronaut is the intention was to have gyroscopes in the bike for stability. This bike does not have that. If you look in the videos, there's two little kickstands that are actually holding up, and that's how on low speeds and kind of on landing, those would deploy with an air cylinder, and that's what would keep it from falling over. But the original idea was to use gyroscopes. And I'm gonna let Rob step back in and talk a little bit about some of the other land speed bikes.
Thanks.
I can just take this one.
Oh, okay. There you go. Okay, so this bike was not built by Bob LePan, but it was purchased by Bob LePan. So Bill Martin also owned a Triumph dealership, just like LePan did in Detroit. They were based in California. So they were trying to also set land speed records with this bike. LePan bought it. He made some changes to it, brought it out to Speed Week. Didn't have any success, but that's the same day that he met Alex Tremulous. So it was a successful failure in some way. This is the Cannibal 2. So that was Bob LePan's drag race bike. And these two engines, they're 650 Triumph engines that are paired together. Those are actually the engines that were in this bike, in the Cannibal 2. So it was both a show bike and a drag race bike. And I believe Bob LePan is restoring the Cannibal 2 right now. The only problem is the engines are here. So, so he's going to have to use a replacement engine or a pair of replacement engines. So this shows his attempt at Bonneville. So you could see the Triumph Detroit logo is now on the Bill Martin bike. And they go out there and they crash, and that's when they go back to the drawing board. So on the drawing board is Alex Tremulous and his idea for the Gyronaut. So the Gyronaut was supposed to have a V8 Ford Cobra engine at first. And this letter here is from Ford. They sponsored to Tremulous the engine so that he can build that bike. The bike never got built with the Ford engine. They end up staying with the Triumph, and so that they can keep the Triumph sponsorship. So we don't really know what happened with that Ford engine, but that Gyronaut 2 never got built. They planned on a Gyronaut 1, which is this bike. The Gyronaut X2 would then have the V8 Ford, and then the Gyronaut X3 would have a rocket engine. So X2 and X3 never got built. This is a clay model of Vince Gardner. And if you see on the back of the bike, it says body by V. Gardner. So Gardner was a customizer. Early on, he worked for Cord Duesenberg, and you see one of his clay sculptures here when they were designing the Cord 810. And later on, he went on his own. If you've heard of people like Gene Winfield or George Barris, Vince Gardner was that type of a guy. He kind of went off on his own and started customizing cars, and Ford would hire his company to build concept cars. So he went on to build this Mustang. They called it the Shorty, right? Yeah. It's the Shorty Mustang. Yeah. And what's funny, is, another connection, is that we just recently restored Tucker number 44, owned by Howard Kroplick, and Howard Kroplick owns this concept car. So it's such a small world. So Howard has this car now, and it's fully restored. But it has an interesting history because Ford wasn't happy with the concept, and they went to destroy the vehicle. But Vince Gardner didn't like that idea, so he actually stole the vehicle, and it was hidden for decades, and recently it was found and uncovered. But he was very protective of his design, so that car has a really interesting history on its own. So here they are, now they're starting to fabricate the bike. You know, you see three names on here: LePan, Tremulous, and Brewfloat. Brewfloat was kind of the mechanic in the bunch. He was very important as far as making these engines work and reliable and make great power. Tremulous, obviously, with the design work and his connection to Vince Gardner, where they shaped this body out of clay and then made a fiberglass version of it. So most of this is the original fiberglass, with the exception of the engine cover and the canopy. Those two items were destroyed in the crash in 1970. This was its first showing, and so it was painted gold, and they finished the Gyronaut, and they brought it to the Detroit Autorama, you know, like where they have the Riddler Award. So they were going to show the vehicle at the Autorama. And last minute, they decided that the paint was too rough, and they didn't like the color, and they decided that there's only one opportunity to make a good first impression. So they decided last minute not to bring it into the show. And so they went back and repainted it and brought it to the show the following year, where it won its class. And if you notice, the paint on this version is opposite of this version. And the reason they changed it is because Alex Tremulous thought that the contrast wasn't strong enough on the silver exterior versus the white salt. So it was too hard to see and too hard to photograph. So then later they went and inverted the colors. But the bike went out and made a big splash. It was very popular. It was fast. It was attractive, it was interesting, it was safer than all the other bikes. One thing that people ask us right on is, how is it a motorcycle when you don't sit on it, you sit in it? Well, that's because it has two wheels. But being that you sit in it, you don't have the ability to use weight transfer or body English to keep it upright. So it would just fall over. So if it didn't have either someone holding it, kickstands, or some speed, it would just fall over. So later on, after the bike would fall over at the end of each race, they developed an air-operated kickstand system, which is on here now. So it would get to the end of the track, and it would kind of find home and lean over to the left or to the right. But early on, it would just fall over at the end. This was the world's fastest motorcycle before the Gyronaut. So this was the Johnson brothers. They ran this bike, and it went 214 miles an hour. And before this team came out, they were the ones to beat. But Triumph had a long history in being the world's fastest. And this is another version of that bike by the Johnsons. And then now, this team, the Gyronaut, started to really get some success. After about a year and a half of trying, they came out, and this was the first record-setting run. And it was 246 miles an hour. The previous one was 214, so it's a big difference. They annihilated the competition. And they held that record, or the title of world's fastest motorcycle, from 1966 to 1970. So that was a long run, and they were pretty much untouchable. And Bob LePan says that he has more miles on this bike at 200 miles an hour than any bike in history, and that stands for even now. In fact, Triumph just built a new streamliner about 2 years ago. It has 1,000 horsepower versus 120 horsepower, and it's only gone 10 miles an hour faster than a Gyronaut. That's how fast this bike is. Then comes Don Vesco. So after 4 years of being untouchable and getting plenty of backing from Triumph, plenty of money and help, Don Vesco comes along with a twin Yamaha-powered streamliner, and he takes the record. Takes the record from the Gyronaut. Then Harley-Davidson comes and takes that record. So now he's number 3. And Triumph is talking about cutting back funding now that he's number 3. They want to give him less money. So they come out with a new paint job. Bike is now running on nitro, so it should make the most power that it ever had. And they're going to come out and really go fast. So LePan is desperate at this point to set the record. So he kind of rolls the dice and trying to get the most out of his run, doesn't start at the starting line. He starts miles before the starting line, trying to pick up speed, get every advantage that he can. Unfortunately, the salt was not smooth, and the front suspension was bottoming out and eventually cracked the frame. So the bike went down on its side and slid for miles. So you could see the bike is crashed, laying on its side here. You can see the pool of blood. The pool of blood is from Bob LePan's arm. So when he was riding the bike, he was on private time. It wasn't Speed Week. He rented private time. Maybe he was a little careless, but he didn't have arm restraints on. So he's in the bike, and he's so confident because he has so many miles on a thing, lots of seat time. Goes out there, bike crashes, goes on its side. This very slick body on salt. If you've ever been to Bonneville and you feel the consistency of the salt, this thing would just slide forever. So it did, and the canopy came off, and Bob's arm came out and dragged on that salt for a mile or who knows how long. And when you're in Bonneville, you got to realize we're talking about like vast distance, 10 miles. So your crew doesn't even know where you are or what your status is because you're so far away, he can't see you. So he's out there alone, and he told me the story about when he got out of the thing and he tries to stand himself up, and it looks like he hears like raindrops, and it's blood, and it's every heartbeat is throwing blood out, and he's by himself. His crew doesn't know where he is yet, and so he's scared. And eventually they get to him. They take him to the hospital in Salt Lake City. He says he remembers driving or riding in the passenger seat of the rescue vehicle, going against the traffic. So he remembers like horns blowing and cars going around him, and they're trying to get to the hospital as quickly as they can. And his arm is just ground up. So they get there, and he's told that they have to remove his arm, and that they're not going to be able to save his arm. And that was not an option for Bob LePan, because if he can't ride a motorcycle, he doesn't feel like he needs to be on this planet. So he tells him, "You have to save my arm." And they said, "We're not capable of it." So they fly him to Salt Lake City, to LA. They put him in a hospital bed and put him in the plane, and they fly him to LA. And they get some surgeons from the Korean War who were experienced at this kind of thing. And they saved his arm. And so now Bob, I think, is about 80 years old, and still rides motorcycles. He set a land speed record at Bonneville on an upright motorcycle within the last 5 years. Since then, he's done the Isle of Man many times. I mean, he's quite a guy. But for him to be brave enough to do this again after a crash like this really speaks to that kind of guy. What you're looking at here is the nose cone and a tail section as we got it. So this was in 2012, I think, 2013. So we were able to save those parts and recreate the missing parts. This is the restored chassis. Bob LePan did that himself. And it has a zinc chromate coating on it to try to fight the salt. Salt is very, very rough on steel and chromoly. few more shots of the engine. So these are actually the engines that did all this stuff. They've been restored. We haven't heard them run since the restoration. It went to Bonneville for its 50th anniversary, and Bob LePan was going to make an exhibition run at 150, but he needed to pass what they call a bailout test. So you'd have to get out of the thing and get your restraints off in a short amount of time. And he wasn't able to do that, so they didn't let him run the bike, which I think is really for the best. You know, the bike has already done everything it needs to do. I don't think it needs to prove anything else. So I think that was probably a good thing. But Bob is still at it. He's still racing bikes. That's our shop with one of our Tuckers. This is a nice comparison shot of them making the body back in 1964, and then us in 2013 restoring the body in our shop. And there's Sean, hands-on sculpting. For Bonneville, for its 50th anniversary, this was just before it was going out to get lettered, and it got lettered by Wild Bill, who was the original artist who did all the hand-painted lettering that you see on the bike, and it looks exactly the way it did back then. But we have one of our reproduction Tuckers being used as a tow vehicle, a start vehicle. And we did that because it's kind of, you know, two tremulous trademark designs. That's Wild Bill doing his lettering. And this is Jim Leggett. He did the restoration of the engines. This is out in Bonneville, 2014. Steve Tremulous in the center, myself, Sean and Mike Tucker, and our crew. So we went out there and we had a great time, you know, watching people see the Gyronaut for the first time. They read about it. Some guys remembered it from back then. It was a pretty cool experience to see that, you know, firsthand. And it looks right at home on the Salt. And Steve uses it for different things. It's been at a few different museums. Here you see he brought it to a school, and he's inspiring kids. Maybe it was Career Day or something like that. It's been to the Quail. It won its class, which I think was a historic competition at the Quail, and also at the Radnor Hunt. And this is a Tucker that we just restored. This is Tucker number 44, owned by Howard Kroplik. And again, that's the connection between Tremulous and the Gyronaut and the Tucker. So we just did the restoration on Howard Kroplik's Tucker number 44, and it said that this particular car, number 44 to number 50, Alex Tremulous had hands-on. He pitched in to help Preston Tucker get his 50 cars done. So we believe that Preston Tucker had basically his friends helping him get those last 6 cars done. So this car had actually Alex Tremulous's hands on it, you know, putting it together, pitching in, getting it done. So right now that car is on display at the Simeone Museum in Philadelphia, and Saturday we'll be doing a demo day. So Sean and his father, the owner of the car, and myself will be there, and we'll be driving the car, so you'll be able to see that and hear it and be up close and personal with the Tucker. So that's about all I have to say. If you want to come and look at it, we can show you what it's like to sit inside, and you can look in and see the controls, and I'll let Sean finish up.
Okay, so I think one thing I wanted to just touch on a little bit is Rob mentioned that we took the Gyronaut out to Bonneville for its 50th anniversary. I'd always kind of known about Bonneville and Speed Week and all those things that were happening out there, but I never really got a grasp for how much it feels like it's a different planet. It's almost like undescribable. You fly into Salt Lake City and you drive 60 miles out in the middle of nowhere, and you pass, you know, Morton Salt Factory, and you get to this place that's in the middle of nowhere, and it's a dry lake bed, but it's not. It's certainly not dry. So it's when you're walking around on the salt and driving around on it, it's like a slurry. So it's not at all like driving on asphalt. So part of the challenges of operating something out of Bonneville is not just going fast, it's dealing with all that and the weather. You know, the weather can change, you know, dramatically. But the isolation is almost troubling. There's no bugs, there's no creatures, there's no plants, there's just nothing. It's really a unique place, and for car people, highly recommended. If you ever thought about doing it, it's very cool. So, but some of the engineering stuff on the Gyronaut, Rob mentioned the it only makes 110 horsepower, which doesn't seem like a lot. But in looking back through some of Alex Tremulous's original plans for the Gyronaut and some of the other land speed cars, he was very aware of frontal area. And one of the neat things to do on the Gyronaut is if you get right up front and look, it only makes a 2 square foot hole in the air. And I think one of the quotes was something like there was no need to disturb any air that we didn't need to. But it didn't take a lot of horsepower. It took a lot of thinking about what actually matters, and that kind of got pretty much proved with the later Triumph that only went 10 miles per hour faster with 900 more horsepower. So yeah, so that's really all I had to add.
All right. Well, we are now here with our guest, Joe Henshaw, who's brought a really cool car, and I honestly don't know much about it. I know very little beyond it's a 1924 with a Mercury
Speedster body.
Okay.
On a Model T Ford undercarriage.
All right.
Modified.
Okay.
It has a lot of parts, speed parts on it. It has a cylinder head on it, overhead valve cylinder head on a Model T Ford motor, made by the Chevrolet brothers. Chevrolet brothers used to build and race Ford race cars. Gaston, Arthur, and Louis Chevrolet.
Okay.
Gaston got killed early on in a race accident. May not have been driving a Ford, may have been a Buick or a Stutz, something like that. So Arthur and Louis continued on and made this cylinder head and other speed equipment for Fords. And this has a lot of it in it.
Yeah.
So you have this aftermarket head on basic Model T.
Model T
engine
block. Yes,
okay.
Correct.
Now they sold these back in the 20s. Okay,
oh yes.
As they did. Now you have this car sort of set up for the road, for just street driving.
Yeah.
But they also had them for racing, and they're different models.
Oh yes, right. This has an R head on it. Okay. Can only take one carburetor. The SR head, you could take 2 carburetors.
Okay.
They also made a head for the Model T, dual overhead cams.
Okay.
And they were awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And
so dual overhead cams. You hear this, okay? And this is back in the 20s. So,
oh yes.
This is high tech stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Just to give you a little on the dual overhead cam head on the Model T block in Canada, up until 1951, they were beating Offenhausers.
Okay.
On a Model T Ford.
Yeah, that's
right.
Interesting. So you have this. You kind of have this set up for the street, though. I noticed you have a license plate on the back.
Yes.
And you got a tail light back there.
Yes.
And you were telling me yesterday you have headlights.
Oh yes,
they're not on there now.
No, I take the grill guard off it and I put the headlights on it and a front license plate.
Okay. And I'm trying to think. You have other like aftermarket racing type parts on this, such as
faultless underslung parts. That's to lower it down the springs, front and rear.
Now I'm going to interrupt you again. I think not this show. I think it was a Reading show. I talked about faultless. They had one that had a full faultless car, speedster for sale at Hershey 4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
And I never heard of them until I saw that. And
okay.
One of the things they had was the underslung to lower the whole chassis.
Right. Yes.
You mentioned yesterday that you had one, and it's like, wow, this is pretty cool. So that was pretty neat. And basically, what that did, they put the frame below the axles.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. Now back to the engine, it has a cross shaft drive Apollo magneto.
Okay.
External magneto, because on the Ford motor, the magneto was inside the transmission.
Okay.
Okay, that's been removed. It has a Sure Mike counterbalance crankshaft.
Right.
It has an oil pump, and the main bearings are pressure fed by the oil pump, okay? Behind the planetary, which is still in there, there's a Warford 3-speed transmission.
Okay.
Underdrive, direct, and overdrive. Back to the rear end, it has high-speed gears in the rear.
Okay.
The car will do like 80 miles an hour.
Okay. You ever go up that fast?
No, because the tires are a little old on it. It needs some new shoes.
Okay. So.
And disc steel disc wheel, racing wheels.
Okay.
Made for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What else can I do for you?
What else can you do for me? No, this is a great car. Now, I have to tell you, you viewers, I met Joe at McCungy several years ago. You had a Model T Ford sitting there with a sign for aftermarket
Himico.
Himico, thank you.
Himico transmission.
Yeah, which was a rebuilt transmission company for Ford back again in the 20s.
Right. This was back in the 20s. Now, this kit, you got a cast iron oil pan, you got a 3-speed sliding gear transmission, almost like a Model A.
Right.
The planetary transmission is now gone.
Mm-hmm.
It was taken out of there. So you drive it almost like a Model A.
Okay.
The trouble with that one is it came out too late in the Model T's life, you know, but it was a good setup, and I have one.
But that was the Himico.
Yes.
And I remember talking to you at McCungy about it, and it was oddball enough that I ended up to do it on TV. I did a TV show about that too, and then I saw you this past year at McCungy again, and we got talking. I said, hey, by the way, I talked about this stuff on television, and then you got talking about this.
Yes.
And that really, raised
that sparked
my
you
eyebrows.
up.
And that was really interesting. And then again at Hershey, I talked to you for quite a while.
Yes.
Me and my buddy Mark.
Right.
Okay. And we
Corvette
talked
Mark.
to you. Yeah, Corvette Mark. And it was pretty interesting.
Now, one other thing is when my wife and I got married, we used this as our getaway car from the church.
Yes.
And she has a picture of it. Brenda, you want to show that picture? No. Okay. She's shy.
Okay. But this is the getaway car.
That's awesome.
This is good. Her veil was blowing out the side, and away we went.
I was going to ask you, how long have you had it?
I've had it probably about 28, 30 years, something like that. Yeah.
And it was kind of an interesting story on how you got it, the history of it, because you told me you can follow it back pretty far.
Back to 1952.
52.
That's where I can follow it back. My friend's father had a business in Maplewood, New Jersey, and he was friends with an FBI agent who liked old cars, and he lived in Maplewood also. And he found this car in Newark, New Jersey, behind a gas station.
Right.
It sat behind a gas station. And he said to my friend's father, I think I can get that pretty cheap. He says, how about if I borrow your son, which is my friend, he was like 13 years old, I need help to push it up on the trailer. So he did. And he went there and they got the car. And that man's name was Charlie Worley. He was an FBI man, like I said. And he kept the car a couple of years, but never really did anything with it. So he figured he was going to sell it. He met up with the fella that I bought it from, whose name was Art Warner, and Art bought it. But at that time, it had a Morton and Brett racing body on it. Art didn't like that. He liked the Mercury body.
Okay.
So he found the Mercury body, and he's the one that put it on there.
So it didn't always look like this
No,
at all?
no,
Yeah. Okay.
no. But the undercarriage and all that, and whether there's racing history behind that, I can't verify that, you know. But
Did you race it?
Well, I've run an exhibition
Okay.
at Latimer Valley, PA Fairgrounds, and Flemington Speedway when that was still operating. That's all I did. The rest we just drive it on the road once in a while.
Now, this is a Mercury body, and a Mercury body is pretty much from here back,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes.
And it's just the body, and you would buy that from Louisville, Kentucky, correct?
Mercury Body Company from Louisville, Kentucky. They made them from 1921 till 1926. They made them. They came with like motorcycle fenders on. They had a top that it came down, and that's why that little lid is in the back. You could stuff it all in there, take the top off, and right, you know.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. And you know, back in the 20s, you know, the Ford. I've heard things like back in that era, half the cars in the country were Model T Fords.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So because of that, they built all kinds of aftermarket stuff,
Right.
including bodies, including lowering kits,
Yeah.
and engine kits, and so on.
Wheels,
and so on.
accessory wheels.
Yeah. And I have a CD at home I bought, and it's nothing but advertisements for bodies, aftermarket bodies for Fords,
Right.
and they're all speedster bodies
Yes.
like this.
Yes.
It's amazing the amount of companies that did it.
Oh yeah.
I think you could even go to like Montgomery Ward
Yes.
and get something like
Yes,
this.
you could. The Mercury Body Company also built them for Chevrolet undercarriages too.
Right,
They're
right.
basically the same thing, just the body mounts are different.
And again, the Chevys and the Fords, you know, just like today, are the
Pretty common ones.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
common. Yeah.
Sure.
I was going to say the cheap cars, but common is a better
Well,
way.
they're common for a reason.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, they were the affordable ones.
Yeah.
Right. Sure enough.
And sometimes you see them for, I think it's Oakland cars too, which were also, or excuse me, Overland.
Overland,
were
yes.
Cheaper cars. So.
Right.
Okay.
So now, the body is 1924, or the chassis, or both? About?
In that era, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Yep.
Now I wonder how hard he searched to find his Mercury body to put on
I
it.
don't know. I didn't ask him. When see, I knew of this car. I don't know if I said that when I was a kid. Knew of it, but it wasn't for sale.
Right.
Okay. And a friend of mine had a Model T, and he went to a show, and the fellow that owned this didn't have the car there, but he said, "Oh, I have a Model T, but it's a race car, and I'm going to sell it," because he was getting older then. And so he told me, my friend called me up, and he says, "Yeah, it's a race car." He goes, I said, "Hold it." I said, "The guy walked with a limp. His name is Art Warner. It's in Whippany, New Jersey, and it's a gray Mercury Speedster." "Yeah." I said, "Are you going to buy it?" "No, I don't want it." Wham! I hung the phone down, and I was there, and I got it, you know.
That's right.
That's how I got it.
You got to move.
Yeah, and I did.
So these Mercury bodies are quite rare today.
Yes.
Right? But I understand you have another one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I got one up on the shelf
Oh, okay.
just
Yeah.
for spare.
A spare.
Oh, so it's not on a chassis?
No.
Just the body.
What had happened before I knew this car was for sale, I saw this one at Carlisle, and the man was from Canada, and he was going home, and I nailed that thing, you know, and collected parts over the years to do it, but it never really got to it, and then this one was available, so now it just sits up on the shelf.
So do you know how many of these bodies they think are in existence out
I'm
there?
not sure how many bodies, 1,400 or something like that.
Oh, okay.
A lot of them. There's some over in Sweden. They're around. They keep popping up here and there.
And I guess a lot of them got banged up because they were racing.
Oh yeah, yeah. A lot of them were
racing on the street and
Yeah.
ran into a tree, or racing on a track
Yeah,
and ran into.
and some of them were modified. They cut this, cut that on them. You know, chopped them up that way.
So.
Nope.
Now I see your Henshaw special there. Did you repaint the whole car?
No.
Okay.
No.
You
just
did
just
that
the
to
let-
kind of match the look.
Yeah.
Then. All right.
Yeah. My friend did the lettering on it.
Nice job.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep.
I like the thing about using it for the wedding getaway car.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we could. Don't you think it should be reenacted?
It should be.
Yeah. Get Mr. and Mrs. Henshaw
You
out
should.
there.
It's a nice day out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah. What else? What did we miss?
You want to see the engine or anything like that?
Yeah, we can. You can, if you can undo the engine pretty quick.
Yeah. Need pliers for that.
Oh, you can do that quick.
Yeah, I can do it. Joe, Jesus.
See, no, we should have had him for hoods up, and he could have.
Oh my
done
gosh,
that.
he would have been
Yeah.
perfect.
So, Anyway, so there you go. There's the engine there, and I believe you'll see a close-up also. But there's the front and neck head, the valve cover and such, and not much to it.
No,
so.
There's a big wick, like a felt wick under there.
Okay.
So it doesn't get oil pressure up to the rockers. They take the cover off and dump oil on it every once in a while and put it back on, and that's the way it is.
Now, that every once in a while, is that like every, like once a week or a certain mileage?
Yeah, depending on certain mileage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I got the Mercury emblem here.
I saw that
like.
there, yeah. So thanks for coming.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing it.
All right.
Thanks for being part of our weekend here.
Okay.
This is awesome.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome.
Well, it was really nice having Joe here. We kept the car in this shop, but we shifted a little because we wanted you to see the crowds behind us.
And why are there crowds here?
Well, because it is Diner Day. And, you know, the last time I think we filmed here, it was a crowded day. It was Heads Up weekend.
Yes.
So that's a little unusual for us. We can't be in the diner, you know, at the beginning and end like normal. But, you know, if you don't make it out to our events, hopefully we're enticing you to come out to them, right?
In fact, I probably won't get in the diner at all, and I probably won't even get a piece of pie.
His cherry pie. I don't know. I heard the cherry was good.
Okay.
You know who told me the cherry pie was good?
No, who?
Brian Moyer, who is a Motormouth alumni.
Mr. AMC, Mr. Gremlin.
Mr. Gremlin. We've seen a lot of people that have been on the show here today.
Yes, yes.
So, and we hear that Maud Betty's coming later, if you all
yes,
remember her.
That I'm excited about, yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, we have so much cool stuff going on here, Diner Day being one of them. Hopefully you see all that excitement back there and are excited to come
and I understand,
to our next one in November.
Aren't we supposed to get like a barbershop quartet here?
Yes,
are they coming?
yes. Right now they're a barbershop trio. They're waiting on their tenor. But I did sing tenor sometimes.
We both pointed at each other. But,
I was told too that the trio sang a little bit in the diner while they were eating, and
really,
it was cool. They did a nice job.
But our viewers will miss them because
they'll miss them.
They'll be home watching TV, and oh well.
So
next time.
This was a little different show. You know, we had an event from last week, and then we had today's event.
Right.
So hopefully you enjoyed it. I know it was a little break from our normal stuff, but we'll get back into the what do we want to call them?
Routine.
Our routine. Okay, our routine.
Routine sounds too routine.
We've got a where have you been lately saved up for next time. We didn't even have time for that with all this excitement, but
great. Yeah.
We'll get back into the regular swing of things next month. So again, thank you all for joining us. Although we're filming this on Diner Day, it'll air a little probably within the next week or so. But we do have Food Truck Fair coming up, and that will be June 29th. So mark your calendars now. That's another great event to come visit us. So I guess until then, we'll see y'all later. And thanks, Joe, for bringing your car. And thanks, Rob and Sean, for speaking the other night.
Right, Okay.